Good afternoon. My name is Ryan Klopf, and I work for the Virginia Natural Heritage Program as a regional steward and supervisor within our stewardship section. I also serve as the Natural Areas Science Coordinator for our program. This afternoon, for my stewardship short, I'll be sharing with you just a little bit about an ongoing restoration of the Shenandoah Valley Sinkhole Pond within Mount Joy Pond Natural Area Preserve in Western Virginia. Sinkhole ponds are found throughout the western part of Virginia within the Ridge and Valley province. These are relatively old ponds which contain unique assemblages of plant species that are also found in other habitats. These ponds are considered critically imperiled in part because many of them have been lost to development. Fortunately, several of these ponds have been protected and are actively managed for biodiversity conservation, including Mount Joy Pond Natural Area Preserve, found here just west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. One of the rare species of wildflower found within Mount Joy Pond is shown here, Virginia sneezeweed, Velenium virginica. A close-up view of Virginia sneezeweed here shows just how beautiful this flower is during its midsummer peak bloom. The Sinkhole Pond within Mount Joy Pond Natural Area Preserve, where species such as Virginia sneezeweed thrive, has variable periods of flooding and dry periods during which it's dry. This oscillating flooded dry state appears to be a critical disturbance in creating just the right habitat for species such as Virginia sneezeweed. Stewards that manage this preserve had noticed that over the past decade, it appeared that the pond was flooded less often than in previous years. This observation led to an investigation. Specifically, with help from Virginia Tech, we turned to the aerial historic photograph record and found that over the past half century, older photographs indeed showed the pond more often flooded than recent photographs that showed the pond more often in a dry state, as shown in these two photographs. We also noticed in these photographs something that is common throughout the Shenandoah Valley, which is an increased cover of trees and a reduction of open woodland habitats. More specifically, the Shenandoah Valley in the last century, like many other places, has experienced a century of fire suppression and a resultant shift away from open oak woodlands towards more closed canopy conditions dominated by mesic species such as red maple and white pine. Our hypothesis is that within the Mount Joy Pond watershed, this increase in the cover of white pine and red maple and other mesic species has resulted in both an increase in the amount of interception of incoming precipitation and associated evaporation of that intercepted precipitation, as well as an increase in transpiration by an increased density of mesic species such as red maple, which has effectively lowered the shallow water table, thereby reducing the amount of time during which the pond itself is flooded. Our restoration plan was to restore the historic oak woodland community of the Mount Joy Pond watershed through prescribed fire. And we hypothesize that this restoration will change the local evapotranspirative balance, favoring an increased amount of time in a flooded condition in the pond. In order to test that hypothesis, we devised a restoration approach that included prescribed fire, but also the installation of 8 groundwater monitoring wells in partnership with Virginia Tech. These shallow wells will be able to determine the depth to the water table in 8 locations throughout the pond. This photograph shows what the margin of the pond looks like after the first prescribed burn had occurred a few months prior to this photograph being taken. The first prescribed burn of the pond watershed had relatively moderate fire behavior and specifically impacted, as you would expect, species that lack fire adaptation such as red maple, white pine, and Virginia pine. This photograph of the northern edge of the pond shows the difference in fire effects of a Virginia pine on the right and a fire-adapted pitch pine on the left. This graph shows the data from our wells. At the top, the blue bars represent precipitation, which appears to be constant throughout the study period. The blue bar horizontal in the middle of this figure shows the zero depth, that is the surface of the pond, and the colored bars at the bottom represent depth to groundwater of the different monitoring wells. prescribed fire occurred at this time, shown by the purple bar here. And one thing we noticed was that about 1 year after the prescribed burn, the pond reached a full flood stage for the first time in the better part of a decade. And while this is just our early preliminary result, and to date only one prescribed fire has so far been conducted within this watershed, this is an interesting and encouraging preliminary result. So as we move forward and continue to restore the pond watershed, we will continue to monitor groundwater in the pond. And we look forward to sharing what we learn as we move forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.